like to just maybe shift gears and say, okay, so that's intriguing probably to some who haven't experienced it, and I've seen similar experiences. But one question I get a lot is, to get there, do we need to follow all of these agile practices we keep reading about? We hear about planning poker and pair programming. You see teams dressed down and playing basketball in the project room. All kinds of weird things are going on. What does it take to be agile? How do you get those results? Do we have to just completely drink the Kool-Aid, or where do you draw the line?
So I'll give you a little bit of insight into what we're doing in that regard. We've got sort of three things that we're trying to do. First off is get a relatively consistent way of doing agile in the company. It's important that the tools, the training, and some common language and a certain amount of common, approach are there. But it's really about guardrails. It's not about, robotic. You walk in at 9 a.m. You do this. At 9:15 you do that, et cetera. That's not exactly the way this works. You need a set of guardrails because some of this is going to apply maybe at different levels in different situations. So in Fidelity, what we're doing is get a consistent way of doing agile. We are also looking at applying agile practices even in quote unquote waterfall projects for a bunch of reasons. We think eventually we'll get more organic adoption of agile throughout the company, but also because things like daily stand-up meetings, that's just about improving your communication, making sure everybody knows what issues are blocking, what aren't. Who wouldn't want that regardless of what methodology you're using, right? Who wouldn't want the benefits of test-driven development so you find problems sooner in the development cycle, in the project life cycle? Just as a couple of examples. So we're doing both of those things, and then third, we're trying to get better at how we do project chartering and sort of visioning and what is important at the broad stroke level. That helps us get at what you were talking about, Jonathan, on adapting throughout the course so that we stay true to the end point.
Good.
I think, as you were indicating, Eric, it's not so much the practices as some of the values behind the practices. And depending on your organization, things like test-driven development, it may apply, may not, but it's better to really first understand the values and the beliefs. And these values are easily transferred across the organization. So if you remember, it's really about reducing that cost of change, whether change comes in the form of new requirements from a business, or maybe environmental change, or defects. So to reduce that cost of change, this is one place where both Scrum and I think extreme programming really agree. Scrum kind of talks in terms of transparency, inspecting, and adapting, having change-ready teams. XP, another form of Agile, talks in terms of Agile values to expedite feedback so that you can respond to change. So they talk in terms of values of communication, high levels of communication, a lot of feedback from the business and the team members. Simplicity, always talk in terms of whatever, keep it as simple as it can be, but no simpler. Courage to make decisions, courage to rethink decisions, and then respect and humility. So I think those values of simplicity, high levels of feedback, high levels of communication, that is what you should really be targeting. The practices like stand-up meetings, just reinforce communication, reinforce feedback. The practice of test-driven development, learn to fail fast so you can respond to the change, right? So one of the anti-patterns I think that is in the industry is focusing too much on, hey, there's 12 or 16 practices of Agile, we have to do them all. I think you really just need to live the values and then select the practices that seem to work for your teams.
Exactly. I can't agree more. It's not about this very specific practices. It's about the values. Agile, I've learned in the last couple of years, Agile is supposed to be agile. You're supposed to be able to adapt as long as you're keeping those fundamental principles of iterative development, reacting to change, addressing the high-risk, important, high-value items first. Exactly.
So to be agile about agile?
Yep.
Agile about being agile?
Right.
So it doesn't sound like this is any necessarily radical concepts. The things you're talking about are motherhood and apple pie. Why aren't we doing them already in our established world? Why do we have to do a Agile, initiative in order to suddenly start communicating better, focusing on quality, being transparent? Any thoughts there?
I mean, I think there are a whole bunch of reasons, honestly. I think it has to do with how organizations plan. In fact, I'll even take a step further back. Agreeing to work this way is not just an IT thing. So anybody that thinks it's just an IT thing, I would, respectfully disagree with you and tell you this is not just about IT. If your business partners do not want to work this way, do not have the focus, the engagement, and you do not have a culture that enables the decision making that you talked about, Gene, then you're done before you start, frankly. So that has to be, sort of table stakes has to be that the business wants to work this way with you as well. But why people don't do it? Because this requires focus, right? This requires a different way of thinking about, how you plan. You can't start all 16 things that you want to do at once. You have to do 4, get them done, and move on to the next 4. That's a very different way of thinking about how you use resources for many organizations. So that's that what I've seen is one of the early things that starts to get in the way, right? That's great, but suppose I don't really believe I'm going to get it faster. So I'm going to be more inclined to start all 16 things at once. And as we have done some of our early learnings, teams moving from working in a waterfall methodology who are used to having the average person, time sliced across 3, 4, maybe or more, in some cases, different projects, this is a whole different ballgame for them. They're just not used to it.
So it requires a real shift in thinking in terms of what people are comfortable with.
That's exactly right. The transparency is one of the other things, right? The transparency, that's a scary thing sometimes in large corporate America, because it's okay. It requires good subject matter expertise. It requires decisive people who both have the knowledge and the authority, the empowerment to make the decisions, so the whole process can continue to move quickly.
Okay.
Those are things that many large organizations are not good at.
Well, on that topic of transparency, I know you want to say something, Jonathan, but I think everybody's happy with transparency when it comes to their successes. Mm-hmm. But with Agile, with transparency, most projects go through a pretty rocky spot. Now that's in the spotlight. How is that beneficial, or how do you get used to that idea?
Transparency, as you said, it shines a big white spotlight on your successes, but also on your failure, and also on talent. One of the big impacts to our organization, and we all view this as a very positive, is it's really shown us who is the A players, who are the performers, and who are not, and it's enabled us to top grade our organization. It sounds draconian, but we've been able to really raise the bar on performance in our shop at Standard & Poor's. We have really let a lot of our bottom performers go, and it's thanks to our Agile methodology that we've been able to see who really can cut it, and it's been a dramatic improvement. And that's very tough for an organization that's not ready to embrace that kind of a culture.
Well, it sounds like it also requires a fairly strong partnership from the business. As your warts become visible because of the transparency,
Yes.
Your partner has to be there saying, you know what, I'm with you, we're going to address these things.
Well, those warts are not always just in IT, right? Sometimes those are, issues with the business partner, again, or partners, degree of engagement, ability to make decisions. Do you really know what you want? Do you really want this thing at all?
Okay.
I think the continual decision-making and reacting and replanning, not the faith in plans, but the faith in planning as an activity and replanning. I tend to think of Agile projects, we tend to think of testing as good, so let's test all the time. Planning is good, so let's plan and replan all the time. I saw this T-shirt the other day from one of the Agile 2010 web pages, I think, but it said, "I plan to replan." So to your point, David, about what about when a project gets rocky and it's all transparent? Well, the thing is, you're seeing it miles before the boat hits the rocks. So you can adapt and change and make that change happen within a day or a week or an hour, rather than waiting until 9 months into the project and, oh my God, we're not going to deliver, and guess what, we need 2 more years on this project. So you're seeing that all the time up front, and we have this motto of failing fast. because you want to fail before there's a lot of investment and you can react and make it positive again.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Gene. So with Agile, then, let's attack another conception that's out there. And this maybe, when you raised XP, this is where I think it's associated with. There's a perception that you can get a team of developers onto XP and you have a group of cowboys, and they're doing just about whatever they want to do. And I don't care about the future, I'm just worried about what I'm doing now, don't bother me, this is what's important. And don't question too closely how we're doing things, we're just gonna do them. That's something that creates a little bit of negative buzz and a little bit of a distaste. Is that real? Why does that perception exist? How would you dispel that?
I think the perception exists because you are allowing the team to self-organize. But beneath that self-organizing and innovation by the team are these, like the guardrails, these fundamental things that must take place. And compared to traditional forms of software development or solution development, I believe that the process is lighter weight, but it demands higher rigor.
It's very rigorous. I've got to agree there.
And
this has been a very rigorous.
And if you see it slipping, you're going to see it right away, whether it's someone coming to a stand-up meeting that's not prepared, or someone not updating their story status as it goes from in development to in QA. There's very, very little tolerance, not from management, but from the team, to not having rigor behind it.
I agree with that completely. I will say that that's if done well, right? There are examples, and we've seen them, examples where people who did not invest in training up front of the team that is going to work this way didn't have the rigor, and therefore the output either wasn't as good, wasn't successful. Some of the things that people often in financial services anyway associate with rigor. Do you have appropriate documentation that supports internal or external audit checks and those kind of things. We saw early on in some of the experiments in the company with Agile, teams that didn't get the proper training or didn't follow the proper rigor did not have those things covered, and it felt what I refer to as fragile as opposed to agile, because it was more cowboyish and it wasn't sustainable, frankly. So as long as you execute with that rigor, you'll be fine.
Okay.
I think the misperception among management that Agile is loose, unstructured, do what you want, no documentation. I think that misperception is one of the reasons, and to your question earlier, that organizations resist or don't go and embrace Agile. Absolutely agree with my colleagues. It's very rigorous. And we've seen that difference, that interface on some of our more complex projects where we have to deal with other teams, outside vendors, suppliers that are not Agile, and it's a real rough interface. It's a tough mismatch, and we've had to go back to our vendors, suppliers, partners who are outside of our team and contributing to our Agile team, deliverables, for example, data feeds. We've had to go back to them and work with them to get ahead of where our Agile team is. So we're like a high-speed freight train moving down the tracks. They have to be ready at the tracks well before we get there so we can pick it up. Otherwise, they're going to stop the train.
Well, and I think you've got to, this is a great, that's a great topic, actually. I think it might be covered in one of our questions, but I'll take us there now, if that's all right with everybody. The notion of Agile fitting inside all the rigorous practices around release management and change management, from putting stuff in production or working with other teams that aren't working Agile. We've seen that you have to have really thought through what are the communication and decision-making dynamics with those teams, right? Is it that they're only going to be available at that one stop as the train is coming by, or that they're going to be available at every 2 stops? So, okay, if I can't get them every day, I get them every other day or every 3rd day or whatever it is, but it's got to be predictable. They've got to know what's expected of them, and you've got to be, when your train is coming up to them, you've got to know, what do you need from them? Are there any decisions to be made or things they need to deliver to you or not? So it speaks to the importance both of the planning and of that purposeful, have you thought about the communication and the, inter-team dynamics.
Yep.
Yep.